A seemingly ordinary morning for a garbage collector suddenly takes a dramatic turn when a crying little girl clings to him, pointing frantically at her home. Within minutes, police cars swarm the street, and the startling truth she reveals will uncover a deeply hidden secret that changes everything. Stay tuned to find out more, but before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. If this story touches your heart, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We have more inspiring stories coming your way tomorrow. Now, let's begin this incredible journey together. The early morning sun stretched across the suburban streets of Silverwood Heights, casting gentle rays on neatly trimmed lawns and rows of pastel-colored homes. It was a picturesque neighborhood, exactly the sort of place where one might assume life was peaceful and safe. But on that particular Tuesday morning, one man would discover just how misleading appearances could be. His name was Ethan Chambers, a sanitation worker who had driven these streets countless times over the last 2 years. Tall, broad-shouldered, and in his late 20s, Ethan was used to rising before dawn, rolling out of bed with bleary eyes, and clocking in at the local waste management plant. It was a routine he'd grown to respect, if not entirely love, finding comfort in the predictability it offered. Usually, Ethan had a partner to share the early shifts, but fate had pulled a trick on him that day. His partner had come down with food poisoning and no replacement was available. The supervisors, already short-staffed, gave him the route alone. While he didn't relish the idea of doing double work, he was the type of person who took pride in finishing what he started. By 7:45 a.m., he was well into Silverwood Heights, but a solid 30 minutes behind his normal schedule. Ethan couldn't help but feel a bit tense about running late. He believed in efficiency and punctuality, and any deviation from his usual rhythm gnawed at him. Despite his internal frustration, Ethan methodically navigated the bulky garbage truck down quiet roads lined with freshly watered flower beds and neat rows of shrubs. His practiced hands guided the vehicle with ease, each movement revealing his 2 years of experience. As a child, he never imagined he would become a garbage man, but life had taken him on twists and turns he could never have predicted. Over time, he'd come to see the dignity in this work. After all, it was essential for keeping communities like Silverwood Heights clean and healthy. Yet for all the routine in his profession, nothing about that morning would be ordinary. At around 8:15 a.m., Ethan pulled up to a familiar house on Blossom Way. He recognized it as the home of Mary Ann and her daughter, Chloe. Over the years, he'd noted small changes around their property. New flowers in the spring, a different color of wreath on the door around Christmas, sometimes chalk drawings on the driveway. The mother and daughter had always seemed friendly, often exchanging quick waves if they saw him. But this morning felt different the moment Ethan spotted them. Mary Ann and Chloe were stepping out of a worn, powder blue sedan. Mary Ann, looking tense, gripped her daughter's hand as though it was a lifeline, leading her quickly to the front door. Their body language immediately set off a small alarm in Ethan's mind. He was accustomed to cheerful waves or at least polite nods. But today, Mary Ann's shoulders were hunched and Chloe's eyes were downcast, brimming with worry. Still, Ethan tried his usual greeting. "Good morning," he called out, a gentle wave of his gloved hand. Mary Ann offered only the faintest acknowledgement, a forced half-smile before she ushered Chloe inside. The door practically closed on Ethan's words. There was no pleasant reciprocation, no bright grin from Chloe. Just tension. Ethan frowned, returning to the truck to handle their bin. He noticed it was heavier than usual. Curious, but it was not his place to pry too deeply. He made a habit of professional detachment. People threw out all sorts of things, and it was not his job to investigate. Yet, as he swung the bin around loaded onto the truck's mechanical arm, a loosely tied trash bag spilled open. Brand new children's clothes with tags intact, an unopened backpack, pristine school supplies, pencils, notebooks, crayons, tumbled toward the top of the bin. Ethan paused. It was one thing to discard old or worn items, but this was brand new. Confusion and concern flickered in his mind. Why would Mary Ann throw away new clothes and supplies? It was possible they just didn't need them, or maybe they were duplicates. But he recalled that Chloe was about the right age for elementary school. Surely these could be donated, not simply tossed aside. Ethan wrestled with whether he should knock on their door. His routine was already behind, and it was none of his business. But the memory of Mary Ann's tense expression and the weight of these perfectly good items spurred him to act. Ethan shut down the truck's compactor before it could crush the bag. He carefully set the bag aside in the truck's cab, then made his way up the driveway. His intention was simple enough. Let Marion know about local donation centers and see if perhaps this was a misunderstanding. He knocked once. No answer. He knocked again. After a long pause, the door finally swung open, revealing Mary Ann. Her usually neat hair was disheveled, and her eyes were red, as though she'd been crying. Her cheeks flushed. She looked nothing like the composed woman he remembered from previous encounters. Mary Ann, I'm sorry to bother you, Ethan began, doing his best to keep his voice calm and warm. I noticed you threw away some brand new clothes and supplies. If you meant to discard them, that's of course your choice. But I thought you might like to know there's a donation center just a few blocks away. These items could help someone else. She stared at him, her expression a tornado of anger and anxiety. That's none of your concern, Marion snapped, crossing her arms. If I threw them away, it's for a reason. Ethan held up his hands in a placating gesture. I apologize if I overstepped. I didn't mean to pry. No, you listen here, Marion interrupted, her voice shaking. If you want them so badly, take them. Just stay out of our business. Before Ethan could respond, a loud crash sounded inside the house. Both of them flinched at the noise. Something breaking, perhaps glass. In that split second, Ethan glimpsed raw fear in Mary Ann's eyes, but just as quickly, she slammed the door. Standing on the front steps, Ethan was left with more questions than answers. A sense of dread crept under his skin. He hovered near the door for a moment, uncertain whether to call the police or simply walk away. No immediate danger was visible, at least from the outside. Yet the unease lingered in his gut. Eventually, he returned to his truck, placing the rescued items in the passenger seat. He reasoned that if Marion truly wanted them gone, he might donate them himself. Still, the image of her fearful expression nagged him. Everything felt wrong. He exhaled, shaking his head as he started the truck's engine. Continuing his route proved more difficult than usual. House after house, bin after bin, Ethan lifted the garbage, processed it, and replaced the empty can by the curb. The tasks were automatic, but his mind roamed back to Mary Ann and Chloe with every idle moment. When he reached the fifth house from Mary Ann's, Ethan heard rapid footsteps behind him. He paused, expecting to see a jogger passing by, or perhaps a neighbor wanting to ask about the trash schedule. But the sight he encountered caused his heart to skip a beat. It was Chloe, Mary Ann's daughter, sprinting toward him in a panic, tears streaming down her cheeks. She clung to the leg of his uniform, breath heaving from her sobs. Mister, please help, she cried. You have to help my mom. Stunned, Ethan set down the bin he was holding and crouched beside her. Chloe, are you okay? Where's your mom? He asked gently. But Chloe only pointed toward her house. She was so distraught that her words tangled in her throat. All she could manage was a trembling. Hurry! I'm so scared. Alarmed, Ethan stood, looking back toward Mary Ann's home. Adrenaline coursed through him. He had never been confronted with such a situation during his route. He started to walk Chloe back, but halfway there she froze. Her small hand clutched his wrist like a vice. Dad's inside, she whispered, her voice barely audible. He's hurting Mom. He said horrible things. He made her throw away all those presents he brought me. He said. Her sobs overtook her. Ethan's stomach twisted. He recalled the brand new clothes and the crash from inside the house. Was Mary Ann's ex-partner or spouse inside? Something about the situation spoke volumes of danger. Before they could move another step, the front door flew open. A tall, well-dressed man stormed out, eyes blazing. Chloe whimpered, shrinking behind Ethan. And who the hell are you? The man demanded, voice booming. Get away from my daughter. Ethan raised his hands, taking care to keep his tone level. I'm Ethan Chambers. I work the sanitation route here. Chloe ran to me. She says she needs help. Help from a garbage man? The man sneered, crossing his arms. He was wearing a sleek business suit, incongruous with the raw fury on his face. You have no business butting into my family affairs. Know your place." His next words, dripping with venom, confirmed Ethan's worst suspicions. He launched into a tirade, calling Ethan every insulting name he could muster, questioning his intelligence, his competence, and even spewing racial slurs. The hostility in his voice was so fierce that Ethan felt a chill. But through it all, Ethan refused to step aside. Chloe's fear was palpable. No child should be this afraid of a parent. "Sir," Ethan began, gripping Chloe's shoulder gently, "I understand you're upset, but your daughter is—" "My daughter," the man snapped. "Let go of her. You're nobody. You think you can lecture me on how to parent? I'll have you arrested for kidnapping and trespassing." Tears welled up again in Chloe's eyes. "I don't want to go with you, Dad. My mom is hurt. Please, mister, don't let him take me." Caught between the paternal rights of the father and the raw terror of the child, Ethan's hands shook. He was no vigilante. He couldn't forcibly keep Chloe away from her father. But he also knew something was terribly, terribly wrong. As the man advanced, Ethan took a step back to avoid escalating physical conflict. However, Chloe clung to him, refusing to budge. The father yanked Chloe's wrist, pulling her. She let out a shriek. "That's enough," Ethan said in a low, warning tone. "You're hurting her." The man didn't relent. His eyes flicked to the neighbors' windows, some of which were cracked open, watchers behind curtains. Realizing he had an audience, he lowered his voice but hissed, "Let go of my child, or so help me, you'll regret it." Heart hammering in his chest, Ethan faced an impossible decision. Legally, he had no authority to hold Chloe. But every fiber of his being told him this was no ordinary family dispute. With trembling resolve, he clenched his jaw and gently loosened Chloe's grip on him. "I'm sorry, Chloe," Ethan murmured. I can't." But before he could finish, Chloe's voice cut through, almost shrill in desperation. "I'd rather die than go back with him. He's going to hurt Mom again. He's going to hurt me." That single sentence, raw and full of terror, was all Ethan needed. He looked the father straight in the eye. "If you're innocent, then maybe you won't mind if I call Child Protective Services. Let them sort this out. But I can't, in good conscience, just walk away when your daughter is this terrified." The man's face went white. He released Chloe, stepped back with a sneer, and spat, "You're making a huge mistake." Then he stomped back toward the house. For a moment, Ethan considered that maybe this would de-escalate the conflict, that the father would yield. But the next few moments would prove him terribly wrong. No sooner had the man disappeared inside than a louder commotion erupted. A door slammed, windows rattled, and Ethan could hear muffled shouts. He acted on instinct, quickly stepping onto the porch with Chloe still behind him. He wanted to see if Marianne was okay. Maybe he could coax her to the door and persuade her to come with him. Before he could knock, the door burst open. The man, whom Chloe identified as Victor, her father, dragged Marianne out by her arm. Ethan's heart nearly stopped at the sight of her face. Bruises darkened her cheekbone, and there was fresh swelling around her left eye. She was too weak or frightened to struggle. Victor shoved her toward a luxury sedan parked haphazardly in the driveway. Chloe let out a shrill scream. "Mom!" Victor pushed Marianne into the passenger seat with brutal force, slammed the door, and leaped behind the wheel. Tires squealed as he reversed down the driveway, apparently planning to flee with her. Alarmed, Ethan pulled out his phone and punched in the emergency number. He barely managed to provide the dispatcher with the crucial details: domestic violence, potential kidnapping, child in danger, before the call cut out. The adrenaline was pounding in his ears. He couldn't let Victor just drive off with Marianne. Taking a calculated risk, Ethan maneuvered his garbage truck, swinging it sideways to block the driveway exit. The truck's size forced Victor to brake hard. Sirens sounded in the distance. Someone else in the neighborhood must have called the police upon hearing the commotion. Victor, seeing his path blocked, glared murderously through the windshield. He revved the engine, and for a tense second, Ethan feared the father might plow straight through the garbage truck. Instead, Victor spun the steering wheel, tires squealing as he veered onto the lawn to go around. That was when two patrol cars arrived, screeching to a halt with lights flashing. Officers jumped out, guns drawn. "Stop the vehicle. Put your hands up." Victor's face contorted with anger. He barely managed to bring the car to a stop before an officer forcibly opened the door, dragging him out. Other officers rushed to Marianne's side, carefully helping her from the passenger seat. She was barely conscious, lips trembling with pain and shock. Chloe ran to her mother, tears streaming, though an officer gently intercepted her, checking for any injuries. The entire block felt thick with tension, onlookers peering from windows and doorways, startled by the chaos in their seemingly placid neighborhood. In the swirl of law enforcement, paramedics arrived to assess Marianne's injuries. She clutched Chloe's hand as if her life depended on it, relief flooding her eyes when she saw Ethan. Victor, meanwhile, twisted in the grip of two officers, trying to maintain some semblance of composure. "I'm innocent," he roared. "This is all a misunderstanding. She's my wife, well, ex-wife, she belongs to me." His outburst only elicited more anger from the officers, who pinned him against the patrol car, frisking him for weapons. One paramedic shot Victor a scathing look, while the rest continued tending to Marianne. Ethan stood a few paces away from the swirling scene, heart pounding in his chest. He'd never been in such a dramatic situation before, and he didn't know what would come next. But something told him that, no matter how complicated the fallout, he had made the right choice by intervening. After the initial frenzy subsided, officers began taking statements from witnesses. One of the neighbors, a kind-faced older man in a Hawaiian shirt, stepped forward. "I heard glass breaking," he told the officers. "Then I saw him drag that poor woman out and throw her in the car. Thank God the sanitation worker blocked the driveway." The neighbor cast Ethan a grateful "No." Chloe clung to Ethan's side like a frightened kitten, refusing to let go. The officers tried to coax her gently toward their cruiser. A female officer with soft gray eyes knelt down. "Honey," she said quietly, "it's okay. We're the police, and we're here to help." Chloe sniffled, her eyes darting to her father, who was still yelling obscenities while the cops wrestled him into handcuffs. "I don't want to go anywhere near him," she whimpered. "You won't have to," the officer promised. "He's going to be in custody." Finally, Chloe allowed herself to be led to a waiting patrol car. Meanwhile, the paramedics assessed Marianne's injuries. Her cheekbone was heavily bruised, and her arms bore fresh, finger-shaped bruises. She was wincing with every breath, suggesting possible bruised or cracked ribs. The older paramedic, a gentle-faced woman, examined Marianne's vital signs. Ethan wanted to check on Marianne, but he hung back, sensing she needed space and professional help. His eyes, however, stayed on her, silently willing her to be okay. The memory of her throwing away those brand-new clothes swirled in his thoughts. It was so puzzling at the time, but now it made sense. She had been scared, forced or manipulated into discarding them, or maybe she had done it in defiance of Victor's controlling behavior. At last, once the paramedics were done patching up Marianne's bruises for transport to the hospital, a detective approached Ethan. Medium height, stern face but calm eyes. "Sir," the detective said, "my name's Detective Alvarez. Could you tell me exactly what happened?" Ethan took a deep breath and recounted the entire morning, starting with how he saw the brand new items in the trash, his decision to knock on the door, Marianne's reaction, the crash inside, and finally Chloe's desperate plea for help. He hesitated at times, worried that he might be seen as intruding on a private matter, but Detective Alvarez's solemn nod encouraged him to continue. "So you felt something was off, and then Chloe found you crying," the detective murmured, scribbling down notes. "That's consistent with signs of ongoing domestic abuse." "Domestic abuse, yes, sir." Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. "I didn't want to assume, but seeing Marianne's face," he trailed off, his expression grim. "You did the right thing, Ethan." Detective Alvarez gave him a firm, approving nod. "We'll need you to file a formal statement at the station. I know you're on the job, but this is serious. We can't let this go." Ethan swallowed hard, looking at the battered mother, then at Chloe, who was trembling in the back seat of the patrol car. "I understand," he said quietly. "I'll do whatever I can to help them." Once Victor was in custody and whisked away in a separate patrol car, The officers turned their attention back to Marianne and Chloe. Marianne insisted on going to the station rather than the hospital first. She wanted to give her statement right away to ensure Victor couldn't spin a false narrative. Chloe's grandmother, Beatrice, arrived in a flurry of worry, having received a frantic call from an anonymous neighbor. She rushed to Chloe, hugging her tight, tears in her eyes. "What happened?" Beatrice asked, voice quivering as she held her granddaughter. "Oh my lord, are you two all right?" Chloe simply buried her head in her grandmother's arms. Marianne stood shakily. "Mom, it's a long story. Let's get to the station, and I'll explain." An officer helped Marianne into the back of another patrol car. Beatrice joined them, and Chloe pleaded for Ethan to come as well. The officers exchanged uncertain glances, but Detective Alvarez nodded. "We'll take your statement there anyway," he said to Ethan. "Might as well come along." And so, an unexpected caravan formed. 2 police cars, lights still flashing, and Ethan's bulky garbage truck bringing up the rear. Neighbors gawked from their porches as the spectacle rattled down the road. Ethan's heart thudded with anxiety. He hadn't cleared this with his employer yet, and he was hours behind his route. But how could he abandon Marianne and Chloe in their moment of crisis? When they arrived at the Silverwood Heights police station, Ethan parked the garbage truck in a visitor's spot. An officer directed Marianne, Beatrice, and Chloe inside, while Detective Alvarez brought Ethan to a separate desk to take his formal statement. For the next hour, Ethan recounted every detail, from his first arrival at Marianne's house to the moment the squad cars took Victor away. The detective's pen scratched the notepad steadily, capturing every word. "What about the items in the trash?" Detective Alvarez asked. "You said you recovered them?" Ethan nodded. "Yes, I have the bag in my truck's cab. They're new. Children's clothes with tags, a backpack, pencils, everything. It looked like they were for Chloe, maybe for a new school year or some sort of trip." "Interesting," the detective mused. "We'll need those as evidence, in case we can use them to corroborate a timeline of events. Marianne might clarify why those were thrown away." Soon enough, Detective Alvarez thanked him and rose from his seat. "I appreciate your cooperation. I'm sure your company will understand, given the circumstances." Ethan exhaled. "I hope so," he said. "I haven't called them yet." While Ethan finished his statement, Marianne and Chloe were in a separate interview room with another detective, quietly recounting years of escalating abuse. "Victor had once been a charming entrepreneur," Marianne explained, "but the moment his business success arrived, so did a darker side: alcoholism, controlling behavior, jealousy. When Marianne filed for divorce, he refused to accept it, terrorizing them whenever he found an opportunity. The brand new clothes were a twisted gift Victor had brought over recently, supposedly for Chloe's upcoming school year, or perhaps for an out-of-town trip. Marianne, suspecting it was a ploy to manipulate them, tried to discard the items rather than accept them. Victor realized this soon after and lost his temper, leading to the violent confrontation Ethan had witnessed. Chloe, for her part, explained how her father's rages frightened her. She recounted nights he would show up drunk, pounding on the door, demanding to see her. Sometimes Marianne would call the police, but Victor's wealth and connections allowed him to skate by with minimal repercussions. This time, though, he had gone too far, physically assaulting Marianne in front of Chloe and attempting to abduct her mother. The evidence was now too severe to ignore. At last, the detective taking their statements emerged, meeting eyes with Detective Alvarez and exchanging a grim but understanding nod. They had enough. This would be more than enough to press charges. With Victor's immediate threat subdued, the station calmed somewhat. Officers bustled about, phones rang, and computers clacked as various forms were filed. In a quiet corner of the waiting area, Ethan finally caught a moment to speak with Marianne, Chloe, and Beatrice. Marianne had a swollen cheek, a fresh bandage on her eyebrow, and a haunted look in her eyes, but relief was beginning to break through her guarded expression. Chloe clung to her mother's arm, still on edge, but clearly feeling safer with Victor behind bars. Ethan approached, removing his cap respectfully. "Hey," he said softly. "How are you all holding up?" Beatrice, a kind-faced woman with worry lines that spoke of a lifetime of caring for her family, gave him a watery smile. "We're just grateful you stepped in, young man." "Thank you." Chloe's eyes lit up with gratitude. She let go of Marianne's arm to throw her own around Ethan's waist in a child's hug. Ethan patted her shoulder gently. Marianne tried to stand, wincing from pain. "Ethan, I can't thank you enough. I was so afraid no one would help." Her voice shook with quiet emotion. "You saved us. Truly." Ethan, never comfortable with being the center of attention, rubbed the back of his neck. "I just couldn't turn away. That's all." A few chairs away, Detective Alvarez ended a phone call and approached. "Marianne," he said, "we'll need you and Chloe to come back for follow-up interviews, but for now, you're free to go. We'll be booking Victor on charges of domestic battery, violating a restraining order, and attempted kidnapping." Marianne let out a breath, tears welling. The detective turned to Ethan. "Mr. Chambers, could you step into my office a moment?" Ethan nodded nervously, following the detective. Once inside, Alvarez closed the door, offering a seat. "I just got off the phone with your supervisor at the waste management plant." Ethan's stomach tightened. I know I'm behind on my route. I didn't mean to cause trouble." Alvarez gave him a sympathetic look. "Relax, it's all right. Your supervisor was concerned because your truck's GPS showed you off schedule, but I explained the circumstances. They want you to finish what you can of your route today, then report to them. They'll likely want a detailed explanation. But from what I gathered, you won't be fired." Relief washed over Ethan, and a small smile tugged at his lips. "Thank you, Detective. That's a load off my mind." "There is one more thing," Alvarez added. "Marianne and Chloe might need a protective order enforced. Given how volatile Victor is, we aren't sure if he'll make bail. They might need extra vigilance." Ethan nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of what the detective was implying. "I understand." The detective rested a hand on Ethan's shoulder, a warm gesture in the otherwise cold setting. "You did good today, but be cautious. People like Victor sometimes look for retaliation. If you see or hear anything suspicious, call us immediately." Ethan felt a knot tighten in his chest at the thought of Victor seeking revenge, but he pushed that worry aside. "Thank you for the warning. I'll be on guard." Exiting the office, Ethan found Marianne gathering her belongings with Chloe and Beatrice. The mother's bruised face looked even worse under the station's fluorescent lights, the bruise darkening to a deep purple. Yet her expression carried a certain determination, as if she had finally decided that enough was enough. She wouldn't hide from Victor any longer. "We're going to head to my mother's house," Marianne explained. "I don't feel safe going home yet. The police say they'll send someone to check on us." Ethan nodded. "That's a good idea. You'll be safer together." Chloe peered up at him. "Are you going back to your big truck now?" Her voice was small, full of childlike curiosity. "Yeah," Ethan said, trying to smile despite the gravity of the situation. "I've got a route to finish, but I'll be thinking about you both." Before they could part ways, Marianne placed a tentative hand on Ethan's arm. Could we stay in touch? I might need a witness, and I just don't want to lose track of the person who helped us." Her cheeks flushed slightly at the admission. Ethan offered a nod. "Of course. Here, let me give you my number." They exchanged contact information, a small but meaningful gesture of trust. With that, Ethan headed out into the bright afternoon sun. The day had somehow flown by in a haze of tension and drama. He climbed into his garbage truck, turning the key in the ignition. The engine rumbled to life, and he pulled out of the police station parking lot, giving a wave to Marianne, Chloe, and Beatrice as they climbed into a car that a friend of Beatrice's had brought. The remainder of Ethan's route felt surreal. He was still in uniform, still driving the massive truck through Silverwood Heights, collecting trash from neighbors who were entirely unaware of what had just transpired. A part of him wanted to shout at them, to say, "You have no idea what's happening behind closed doors in this neighborhood." But he kept to himself, mechanically performing his duties. At the second-to-last house for the day, an elderly resident hobbled out to ask why the pickup was so late. Ethan apologized politely, blaming unexpected circumstances. She merely grunted and went back inside. He realized then how quickly the extraordinary can fade into ordinary routine. By the time he returned to the waste management depot, it was well past his normal end of shift. He parked the truck, tidied up, and reported to the main office. His supervisor, a stout, no-nonsense woman named Miss Darby, eyed him from behind thick glasses. "Chambers, you had quite the day." "Yes, ma'am," Ethan said quietly. "Detective Alvarez gave me the rundown." She clicked her pen. "I trust you understand we can't have these kinds of interruptions regularly. But in this case, I'm glad you did what you did. We won't penalize you, though we'll have to document it." Relief warred with exhaustion in Ethan's mind. "Thank you. I appreciate it." She stood, offering a firm handshake. "Go home. Get some rest. We'll see you tomorrow morning, bright and early." Ethan mustered a thankful nod and left. Outside, the sky had turned gold and orange, the sun dipping low. It was a reminder of how long his day had been. Ethan's evening was restless. Images of Chloe clinging to him, Mary Ann's bruised face, and Victor's twisted sneer haunted his thoughts. He couldn't help but wonder if Mary Ann and Chloe were truly safe at Beatrice's house. The next morning at 5 a.m., he was back on the job, the same route, the same mechanical process. But everything felt different now. As he navigated the truck along Blossom Way, passing the houses he knew so well, he realized how little he truly knew about the secret pains people carried behind those white picket fences. By mid-morning, as he approached Mary Ann's house, he noticed a police car parked out front. The driveway was empty. No sign of Mary Ann's sedan or Victor's luxury car. He wondered if the officers were there to collect further evidence or just to check on the property. Seeing the police presence calmed him somewhat. It meant the authorities were taking this seriously. Ethan continued his route, hoping that no news was good news. Just before noon, Ethan's phone buzzed. He normally never checked his phone while driving, but intuition told him to pull over. Parking the truck safely, he glanced at the caller ID. It was Mary Ann. "Mary Ann," he answered, heart pounding. Her voice wavered on the other line. "Ethan, I'm sorry to bother you, but I didn't know who else to call. The police are taking statements, but they're also asking me to gather more information about what happened yesterday and about those items Victor brought for Chloe." "You mean the bag I saved from the bin?" "Yes." The detective wanted to see if I recognized or had receipts for any of those items, or if there's any sign that Victor's purchase was part of a bigger plan, like a forced relocation. Mary Ann exhaled shakily. "Could you come by the station with it?" Ethan hesitated. He was in the middle of his shift again. "Sure. Let me see what I can do. I'm at least halfway done, so maybe I can get a short break to drop it off." "Are you all right?" She seemed to sense his concern. "We're okay. Chloe's with my mom, and we're safe in a hotel for now. Just really tired and shaken up." He felt a pang in his chest. "I'll do whatever I can to help. Text me the detective's name, and I'll bring the bag over as soon as I'm able." After they hung up, Ethan quietly mulled over the fact that once again, his job, responsibilities and his moral responsibilities were colliding. But there was no question in his mind which mattered most. Within the hour, Ethan swung the garbage truck into a visitor space at the Silverwood Heights police station. He carried the bag in carefully, still sealed as he'd found it, to Detective Alvarez's office. The detective's eyes lit up with recognition when he saw Ethan. "Mr. Chambers, you're really going above and beyond," Alvarez said with a faint smile. "Let's see what we've got here." Ethan handed the bag over. "I didn't tamper with anything, other than noticing what was on top." Alvarez pulled on gloves, then carefully opened the bag. He removed a brand new backpack, still with the price tag, flipping it around to note the store brand. Next, a neat pile of new clothes in Chloe's size. Then several unopened packs of pencils, markers, notebooks. "Looks like the kind of stuff you'd buy for a school year," Alvarez murmured, "but in very large quantity. Could be that Victor planned to enroll her somewhere else, out of town or even out of the country, and needed to outfit her from scratch." Ethan's eyes widened. That was Mary Ann's fear. He'd threatened to take Chloe away. Maybe that's exactly what he was trying to do. Alvarez nodded gravely. "This bag helps establish premeditation. Combined with Mary Ann's testimony, we might be able to charge him with attempted kidnapping, not just domestic violence." A small silence settled as the gravity of the situation sank in. Ethan was relieved that the evidence might strengthen the case, but also horrified by how close Chloe had come to being taken away. Alvarez looked at Ethan. "Thank you again." We'll keep you updated on the case. Please be careful, though. We haven't located all of Victor's associates. He may have friends who could try to intimidate witnesses. Ethan swallowed the lump in his throat. I understand. After leaving the station, Ethan tried to finish the rest of his route, but his mind was a mess of thoughts and emotions. He concluded his pickups, returned the truck to the depot, and spent the evening in a restless haze. He kept checking his phone, half expecting a desperate call from Marianne. Days passed, and life in Silverwood Heights resumed its outward normalcy. Victor's arrest made the local news briefly, though details were scarce. Ethan occasionally drove by Marianne's house on his route, seeing it still empty, except for that sporadic police presence. Each time, Ethan's heart clenched with worry. Where were Marianne and Chloe staying? Were they safe? He had offered to help however he could, but there was a limit to what a sanitation worker could do in the face of a violent, well-connected abuser. One Thursday afternoon, about a week after the incident, Ethan finished his route earlier than usual and decided to grab groceries on his way home. Wandering the aisles in his dusty uniform, he felt out of place among the neatly dressed 9-to-5ers just wrapping up their day. Then, as he turned down the cereal aisle, he froze. Marianne, holding Chloe's hand, stood at the far end, talking softly with Beatrice, who guided a shopping cart. Marianne's bruises had faded to a sickly yellow-green. Chloe clutched a stuffed plush cat in one hand, a serious expression on her tiny face. Ethan's first instinct was to retreat, not wanting to intrude on their personal time. But then Chloe spotted him. Her face lit up, and she tugged Marianne's sleeve. Marianne turned, and relief softened her features. She waved him closer. "Ethan," Marianne said, offering a tentative smile. "It's good to see you." He gave him a warm nod, noticing how uncertain Marianne still looked. "How are you all doing?" Beatrice spoke up, her tone motherly. "We're doing okay, dear. We're staying at my place for now. The police keep us informed on any updates with Victor's case. But it's still a bit scary." Chloe let go of her mother's hand to sidle closer to Ethan. "They said Dad might have to stay in jail until the trial," she said quietly. "But if he bails out, we have to be real careful." Ethan felt a familiar pang of worry. "I'm sure the police will do their best to protect you." He forced a supportive smile, though inside, he loathed how uncertain the legal system could be. Marianne hesitated, then spoke, her voice low enough that passers-by wouldn't hear. "I want to thank you again for what you did. I'm sorry if I put you on the spot that day. I know your job was on the line." He shook his head. "Honestly, it was a no-brainer. I just did what anyone with a conscience would do." She gave him a look that suggested she doubted many others would have done the same. "Well, I'm grateful." And she glanced at Beatrice, who gave a small, encouraging nod. "If you're not busy sometime, maybe we could have dinner? I'd like Chloe to have a positive male figure to look up to for a change. If that's not too forward." Surprised, Ethan paused, warmth creeping into his cheeks. He glanced at Chloe, who was smiling shyly. I'd like that," he replied gently. The next few weeks marked a cautious, yet hopeful chapter for Marianne and Chloe. They lived at Beatrice's place, which was smaller but filled with grandmotherly warmth, doilies on every table, family photographs on the walls, and the smell of fresh-baked cookies wafting through the air. Marianne secured a new restraining order, and the police assured her that Victor would be held until he faced trial, given the seriousness of the charges. Ethan stayed in touch, checking on their well-being during his off hours. Initially, Marianne was hesitant to let him see where they were staying, fearing for everyone's safety. But soon, trust grew, and Ethan was invited for a home-cooked dinner. He found himself building a surprising rapport with Chloe, who was slowly regaining the bright spirit she'd shown glimpses of before. During that first dinner, they laughed over minor things: Chloe's stuffed animal collection, Beatrice's comedic remarks about her younger years, and Ethan's misadventures as a rookie sanitation worker. For a few precious hours, they managed to set aside the trauma that still lurked in their memories. Marianne's bruises healed further, and though she occasionally winced from lingering rib pain, she seemed determined to move forward. She looked at Ethan more than once with an expression of humble gratitude that tugged at his heart. Ethan continued working his route, But now, every time he passed Mary Ann's old house, he felt a pang of sadness mixed with relief. The property was vacant, a silent reminder of what had transpired. Sometimes, as he traveled the neighborhood, he thought about the thousands of families behind those doors. How many of them might be harboring secrets and fear? He reflected on how easy it was for outsiders to remain oblivious. Before that fateful day, he had only known Mary Ann and Chloe as polite neighbors who tossed out their trash like everyone else. He never expected to be woven into their lives. One early morning, as he loaded a bin into the compactor, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in the truck's side mirror. He was covered in dust and sweat, baseball cap perched on messy black curls, eyes shaded with fatigue. And yet, he felt an unshakable pride in who he was and what he had done. Maybe he wasn't some high-powered executive, but he had helped rescue two people in dire need. That had to count for something. In quiet moments, he also wrestled with the possibility of Victor seeking retribution. Detective Alvarez had warned him, but each time that fear surfaced, Ethan recalled Chloe's tearful face the day she ran to him, and he knew he wouldn't change a thing about his decision. The day of Victor's first court hearing arrived, a cold, drizzly morning that painted the courthouse steps in a slick sheen. Mary Ann, Chloe, and Beatrice showed up accompanied by a victim's advocate. Ethan, having taken a personal day, joined them as moral support. Tension weighed heavily in the courtroom. Victor sat at the defense table, hair slicked back, jaw set in defiance. Occasionally, he shot glares at Ethan or tried to catch Mary Ann's eye, but she refused to look at him. When the prosecutor presented evidence, photographs of Mary Ann's bruises, testimonies from the paramedics, the police, and Ethan's account, Victor shifted uneasily. His attorneys objected, of course, but the judge remained unmoved by their attempts to dismiss the evidence. Chloe's small figure on the stand brought tears to many eyes. She spoke in a trembling voice about how her father had hurt her mother, how she saw him drag Mary Ann out of the house, threatening to leave the country with her. The judge listened intently, compassion evident in her gaze. Ethan was called to testify as well. He recounted, under oath, how he had encountered Mary Ann and Chloe that morning, how he found the new clothes, the confrontation with Victor, and the violent abduction attempt. Standing in the witness box, he felt nerves spike through him. But looking at Mary Ann and Chloe gave him strength. He told the court every detail. When the dust settled, the judge ruled that Victor would remain in custody, citing him as a significant flight risk. The relief on Mary Ann's face was unmistakable. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but they were tears of release. Some measure of justice was finally taking shape. It took many more weeks and hearings before final resolutions were hammered out. But ultimately, Mary Ann was granted sole custody of Chloe, and Victor faced serious charges for domestic abuse, attempted kidnapping, and multiple restraining order violations. His high-powered attorneys fought tooth and nail, but the evidence was overwhelming. Throughout this period, Ethan found himself growing closer to Mary Ann and Chloe. Their shared experience of crisis transformed into a bond of genuine friendship, and, cautiously, something deeper blossomed between Ethan and Mary Ann. Chloe's nightmares still plagued her at times, but therapy, combined with a stable, loving environment, helped her regain a sense of normalcy. Mary Ann, too, sought counseling to heal from years of fear and manipulation. She discovered a renewed desire to stand on her own 2 feet, eventually landing a steady job at a local clinic as an administrative assistant. Ethan continued on his daily route, though he'd occasionally change his schedule or swap routes with a co-worker if Marion needed a ride to a legal appointment. His supervisor, Miss Darby, surprised him by being remarkably accommodating, perhaps moved by the gravity of the situation. One quiet Saturday, months after the initial incident, Ethan found himself back on Mary Ann's front porch. Only it wasn't the battered scene he remembered. They had finally sold the old house that carried too many dark memories, settling instead into a smaller but cozy rental near Beatrice's place. The garden was filled with newly planted flowers, and laughter drifted out from the windows. Marian opened the door, wearing a light sundress, bruises long gone. Her smile was radiant, if still a bit cautious. Chloe peeked out from behind her, squealing with delight. "Ethan, you made it." He stepped inside, carrying a small bouquet of daisies. "Just a little housewarming gift," he said sheepishly. Beatrice, bustling in from the kitchen, greeted him with a warm hug. "Dinner's almost ready. Make yourself at home." In the living room, photos lined a shelf. Pictures of Marianne and Chloe together at a park, one of Beatrice with Chloe at a school function, and a new addition, Ethan, Marianne, and Chloe smiling at some local fair. It was a snapshot of hope and recovery, the family forging a new path. Ethan inhaled deeply, feeling at peace. This was the life he'd indirectly helped save. The mother, the daughter, the grandmother. And in turn, they had shown him that you didn't need wealth or status to transform someone's world. You only needed compassion and courage in a moment of crisis. As they gathered around the small dining table, passing dishes of roasted vegetables and chicken, the talk turned reflective. Beatrice, tapping her fork on the plate, said to Ethan, "You know, we never asked. Where did you learn to be so brave?" He chuckled. "I don't know if it's about learning bravery. I saw a little girl in trouble and acted. Maybe it's just basic humanity." Marianne's eyes glistened. "It's not so basic, Ethan. Plenty of people prefer to look away, especially if it means risking their safety or job. You chose not to. We can never repay you for that." He reached for her hand across the table. "You already have," he said softly, glancing at Chloe, who was preoccupied dipping her bread in the gravy. "Seeing you both free from fear is more than enough." A comfortable silence fell over them, a silence of deep understanding and mutual respect. In the following weeks, word spread quietly among some of the neighbors. Many learned the truth behind the day the trash pickup ran late, behind the swarm of police cars that had abruptly descended on Blossom Way. Although some whispered rumors or indulged in gossip, most of the community rallied in silent support for Marianne and Chloe, offering discreet kindness whenever possible. Ethan kept doing his job, noticing subtle changes in how people treated him. There were more friendly waves, more offers of a quick chat, more children running out to greet the cool garbage truck driver. It seemed his act of compassion had reframed the way some folks viewed the sanitation worker who made their daily lives cleaner. Marianne continued her healing journey, stepping into the role of a single mother who was no longer defined by fear. Chloe settled into her new school, forming friendships and finding joy in normal childhood activities. She'd occasionally mention her father in therapy sessions, processing her conflicting feelings. But the nightmares grew less frequent, replaced by safer dreams. Ethan and Marianne found themselves leaning into a sweet companionship. It was early, still delicate. Both were cautious, having been burned by life in different ways. Yet they found strength in each other's presence. They began planning small weekend trips, like a day at the local nature reserve or a short drive to the beach. Chloe thrived in this environment, forging happy memories that replaced the dark ones. About a year after that fateful day, the domestic abuse case against Victor concluded with a guilty plea on multiple charges. He faced a significant prison sentence. Marianne and Chloe, with the support of Beatrice, shed tears of relief when the news came. It was an ending, in a way, a closing of a chapter that had threatened to tear them apart. One morning, Ethan pulled his garbage truck into a quiet cul-de-sac on the far side of Silverwood Heights. The day was bright and clear, the sky a vivid blue, the air cool with a hint of autumn. A swirling sense of gratitude filled his chest as he remembered the terror of that morning a year ago. He hopped out to empty a bin. A small boy, maybe 5 years old, poked his head around the corner of a fence. "Cool truck," the boy shouted. Ethan laughed, gave the boy a thumbs up, and returned the bin to its place. As he climbed into the cab, his phone vibrated. A photo message from Marianne popped up. Chloe, proudly holding up a hand-drawn picture of Ethan, helping her and her mother. In childlike scrawl, it read, "My hero." Warmth flooded Ethan. Setting the phone aside, he steered the truck onto the next street, heart light despite the weight of the day's work. He realized in that moment something simple, yet profound. Sometimes our daily roles, be it garbage collector, office worker, teacher, nurse, are not what define our capacity for good. Rather, it's the choices we make when confronted with someone else's suffering. Do we turn a blind eye, or do we step in, risking inconvenience or even personal harm? For Ethan Chambers, the choice he made one ordinary Tuesday morning forever changed the trajectory of 3 lives: Marianne, Chloe, and yes, even his own. In stepping forward to protect a frightened child and her injured mother, he found a deeper sense of purpose and compassion within himself. And in so doing, he discovered that real heroism isn't about capes and superpowers. It's about empathy, about caring enough to act when others might walk away. The road ahead would never be completely free of challenges. Life rarely grants such luxuries. But for this newfound family, forged by crisis and bound by kindness, hope was more than just a distant dream. It was the reality they woke up to each morning, a reminder that even in the darkest corners of a quiet suburban. Thank you for listening. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring content. Don't forget to turn on notifications. See you soon.